And so I got a great question about indies and free-to-play, about how indies can do that, because essentially free-to-play is what? Free-to-play is a numbers game. Every time, no matter how you do it, when you acquire, let's say, 1,000 players, you are gambling, game development, legal gambling, you are gambling that out of those 1,000 players, you're going to get a whale. And maybe that whale will help you pay your bills, but these big guys are also banking on that as well, right? So this holiday season, we saw CPI reach $7. That's insane. And that's all for the holiday season when Apple closes down and basically pauses the App Store. It used to be for like 2 weeks, so if you positioned yourself in there, and you get all the eyes in the world on the top charts. But now, those time frames only last for about a minute, maybe half a minute, I think it was this year. So basically, like I said, free-to-play is a numbers game. And in 2014, if you make the conscious decision, or your studio or your team makes the conscious decision to make a free-to-play game, you have to admit to yourself. You have to admit to yourself what you are making. That passion can still be there, but if you plan to survive, and if you have bills to pay with a free-to-play game, you absolutely have to admit to yourself that you are making a machine. And this machine takes in, let's say, $1,000, and after some LTV and maybe a little bit of social K factor in there, you have to at least get what you put in plus at least one, right? So, unfortunately, it is essentially, if you spend $1,000 on acquiring users, maybe however that is, maybe you're out buying them, maybe you're getting it, whatever it may be, you have to at least get 1,001 users. And that's not pretty information to hear. But unfortunately, these days with the competition to stay afloat in free-to-play, if you have bills to pay, how efficient your machine is at turning that 1,000 to 1,001 is absolutely a factor, if not the biggest factor in monetary success in free-to-play these days. And as indies, you know, we sometimes don't have those budgets to buy those installs, which is perfectly reasonable, especially at the top of the charts where, you know, that's where the real organic installs happen. So, as I'm sure is the case out there, it's all about that passion for me, as I'm sure it is with you guys as well. It's about the game. And I came from the experimental game scene where we don't have to worry about, you know, monetization and all this jazz, where it's all about what kind of narrative you can relate, what kind of mechanics you have, what kind of, a long list of what you can express from a developer to the player with the game being the tool in between. But I don't think that passion that we all have and that machine that we need to make money have to be mutually exclusive. So sometimes, you know, we'll all read and we get a little bit too familiar with what can happen when the industry starts to abuse those psychological free-to-play tricks, right? We sometimes make the wrong compromises, and we make compromises over gameplay in exchange for what can be some pretty ruthless monetization sometimes. So do not think, please do not peg me as a huge advocate for free-to-play, because I'm not. That is not the case. I am not in bed with free-to-play. But with that, the strongest argument that I can pass on about free-to-play is that content should be delivered to people who pay a price that they deem fair. So if a rich dude living over in the marina is used to dropping $100 on his night of entertainment, and he's coming down from work trying to go down for some beers, I do not have many friends who would say, no, please do not spend that on my virtual currency. No, absolutely not. And I will be right there with him with no moral boundaries to say, look, if you're used to spending $100, if you think that is a fair exchange for an evening of entertainment, despite an exaggerated example, then that's fine. But we see the opposite spectrum of that, right? And we see maybe little Timmy who's coming along, and he's only got, 25 cents from his lemonade stand or whatever it is. You're trying to convince little Timmy to spend $1 or $2 on your game. You've got no chance. He just doesn't have it, no credit card, whatever. And so that's fine. And as free-to-play designers or developers or whatever it is, we need to be very, very aware of that and acknowledge that and actually design all of our feedbacks around that type of player who doesn't spend anything. And we can absolutely do that because maybe little Timmy can tell his friends about your game and continue to get the word out there. So I think it should be noted that despite free-to-play's negative reputation, which I agree, there is nothing wrong with allowing people to pay what they think is a fair price for their entertainment. the controversy is, of course, what is fair. Now, mobile can be hard. Free-to-play for indies can be even harder. But there are people in this room right here, your neighbor, the person sitting next to you, the community of Apps World, of the game industry, that is right there with you, and they don't, I like to say that free-to-play indie designers are not in denial. They're just very selective about the realities they choose to accept, which is very, very much the case sometimes. So we need to remind whoever's sitting next to each other, whoever's in our industry, if we fail to make a free-to-play game, or rather, when we fail to make a free-to-play game, failure and success it's not a Boolean, right? It's not either you failed or you succeeded. Failure is absolutely a stepping stone to success. So please, you guys, go out there, make great games. Thanks very much.
Right, there's a lot to be unhappy about in terms of some of the monetization practices of some mobile games, or some free-to-play games. That said, I think betting against free-to-play right now as a dominant business model in the games industry over the next couple of years is probably ill-advised. I think there is a place for non-free-to-play games. There is a place for for other business models clearly, but free-to-play is today and will be the dominant business model for the foreseeable future. I do think though that free-to-play contains an awful lot of different practices, all the way from at the most conservative end, League of Legends, that where like you're 20 hours into the game and you still don't understand why on earth you would pay money for anything in this game. But still 200 hours in, you find yourself having paid a couple of $100, and that's the most conservative end. All the way to some unnamed mobile games, even in the top 10 today, where you feel 15 minutes in, like unless you pay a substantial amount of money, there's nothing to be done here, right? It's sort of move on quickly if you're not ready to pay. So I do think there's sort of end-to-end practices in the marketplace today. What I do think, though, that in particular, what I've always been a huge fan of Supercell, and one of the reasons why I think they've done such a great job at pioneering kind of thinking in terms of free-to-play is letting people get very far into the game before they feel like there is, before they ultimately end up spending money. I think that it's just a really good practice, because free-to-play is fundamentally the fairest business model in my mind, in that you know what you're buying. It's not like you don't know what the game is. It sits in a box and you've seen a TV commercial. You actually know whether you enjoy it. You're multiple hours into the game before you start paying. I think that's super fair to consumers. I think, and it's the more that consumers have a picture of the value of what they're getting, I think the better. And typically, I think all of us who are in the market know that engagement metrics are by far the best predictor of spend metrics. So if you're able to engage a set of consumers, you will probably be able to find ways to provide them with value that they're willing to spend for. And I would always caution anyone, again, like I would always optimize for engagement metrics and then slowly iterate on monetization in a way that feels good. I would never optimize for monetization metrics. I just think it's a path that leads you to bad places overall.